Dearest Texas history scholars, today we will be making a study guide for Unit 6. We're going to take that test here pretty soon, and this first side is going to be over Part 1. So here we go. Unit 6, Part 1, and then we're going to talk about the Republic of Texas. The Republic of Texas lasts from 1836 to 1845. All right, so the first president of the Republic of Texas was Sam Houston. He is the first and third president of Texas. During his time in office, his first term, and his second term, he focuses on peace with Native Americans. He also focuses on decreasing the Texas debt. So during the Revolution, During the Revolution, Texas borrows weapons, and they have soldiers from the United States, like Kentucky and Tennessee and Georgia and Mississippi and places like that. And so he knows that he has to pay those back. One of the things that he does to decrease debt is that he dismisses the army because he knows he can't pay them. And instead, he enlists the help of the Texas Rangers, which was a very small, sort of like police force, but they served all of Texas. These people were not paid. They were volunteers. They brought their own food. They brought their own horses, their own weapons. And then their primary job was to protect citizens of Texas. And there's a lot to protect citizens from. During this time, we had Native American raids, and we had Mexican soldiers crossing over the border to try to start or continue the Texas Revolution so that Texas would become part of Mexico again. So there's a lot for them to do, and they're not being paid. The leader of these Texas Rangers is Jack Coffey Hayes, which we've been talking about him in class. So the next president that we had after his first term was Marable Lamar. And Marable Lamar is the second president of Texas. There's a lot of things that happened during Marable Lamar's presidency. This is where we see distrust of people that are of Mexican descent. And we see this at the Cordova Rebellion. During the Cordova Rebellion, a guy gets a bunch of Native Americans and Tejanos together, and they try to fight for Mexico. They want Mexico to regain control of Texas. This creates distrust between Anglo-Americans and natives, and Anglo-Americans and Mexican settler, or they're Tejanos. They've been in Texas, but they still want to be part of Mexico. He also is part of the Council House fight, where Native Americans say that they're going to return captives, and then they only bring one captive, and so the Anglo settlers attack the Native Americans, and it turns out to be like an all-out fight. During his time in office, there's several fights with natives. And he spends money on like militias and fights and supplies and stuff like that with Native Americans. One of these fights involves Chief Bowles, or as third period likes to call him, Chief Bowles, which it's Bowles. Okay, so in the fight with Chief Bowles, Lamar is like, I want you to take all the Cherokee out of Texas. And he's like, but our crop isn't ready. And then Marable Lamar is like, go now. And in this scuffle, Chief Bowles is killed, and the Cherokee are sent to live in Oklahoma. They are forced to Oklahoma. Oklahoma is north of Texas. I hope you already knew that. Okay, he also, like we talked about, he increases Texas debt. He tries to make money. I'm about to spell that wrong again. That's a tricky word. He increases debt, increases spending by a lot. He's like, long hair, don't care. I'm going to do what I have to do. The things that he spends money on are the Texas Navy. That was where Edwin Moore was the captain or the commodore, and then Edwin Moore helps the Yucatan rebels, which causes more conflict. But this time it causes conflict with Mexico. Then he tries to buy more ships to make the Navy stronger. It just spirals. It's not a good idea. He spends money on public education, which we talked about that is a noble cause. That really was a good idea. He sets aside land for UT and Baylor and also Texas A&M. He spends money on the Santa Fe expedition, where Marable Lamar thinks that Texas should stretch through New Mexico, through Arizona, and on to California. This is a failure, and it creates more conflicts with Mexico, which costs money because then he's paying people to fight Mexico. Ugh, what a mess. The last president, we need to go back here. First, second, third. During Sam Houston's second term, he tries to get rid of the Navy. He knows how expensive they are, and he thinks that Edwin Moore is terrible. In fact, he fires Edwin Moore. He tries to sell the Navy to another country, but no one buys it. He feels like this is one of many drains on Texas finances. He feels like the Navy's just going to drain money, which is why he tries to get rid of it. The next guy that we have, the fourth president, is Anson Jones. That sounds familiar because Anson, Texas is near here, and it's named after Anson Jones, so it's Jones County. This guy is a big fan. He loves Sam Houston. So he kind of like duplicates all of Sam Houston's policies, where he tries to get rid of the Navy. He tries to keep peace. He tries to decrease spending. He encourages Texas Rangers to handle all of the conflicts instead of paying people. The thing that Anson Jones is most known for is he's the architect of annexation. So he was the guy that made annexation happen. This is the wedding. Remember, let's draw a wedding ring. When Texas is no longer single ladies. Annexation of Texas into the United States. Texas becomes a state. Therein firing Anson Jones, because if they're part of the United States, then they don't need a president anymore. Here's something notable. In 1837, which was during Sam Houston's term, in 1837, Sam Houston applies for annexation, and the United States denied annexation. So they would not marry Texas. Because they feared that since Texas was a part of Mexico so recently, that it would cause a war with Mexico. So they denied Texas statehood because of fear of war. They knew that was coming and they didn't want to be a part of a war. Okay, so I'm going to go back and I'm just going to circle the main concepts that we talked about. Sam Houston, Mayor Lamar, Anson Jones. Another main theme is that the United States does not want Texas early on because they're fearing war with Mexico, which does end up happening in part 2. Which brings us to part 2.